Hello everyone, my name is Britton, and welcome to the Guilty Gear lore video. I don't know, the Guilty Gear is cool, so I'm just going to do this. Okay, so this presentation, this whole thing is only going to cover mainline Guilty Gear, not the spin-offs, because they aren't canon, and I don't really care about them. Also, it only covers lore and characters, not actual development of the games or their gameplay, so don't come in expecting that. Also, I'm throwing a lot of names and words at you in a short amount of time. If you aren't sure what something means or who someone is, don't worry about it. We'll get to it eventually. Um, there we go. All right. First event in the timeline. What could it possibly be? German Crusaders attempt to retake Jerusalem at some point in like the 12 or 1300 something. I think that I don't remember exactly where this is. Remember this later. It will actually be important. I promise. Also, in 1945, the UN is formed. It's important to note that the UN in this universe gets stuff done. They do not mess around. And from 1945 to 1998, okay, the original is born, that man is born, Frederick Balsari is born, Arya Hale is born, Axel Lowe is born on December 25th. He also ends a gang war in 90s England and then disappears. He just mysteriously disappears, leaving behind his girlfriend and Megami. We will get back to that. Also, a vampire named Slayer forms what is known as the Assassin's Guild. Okay, so this guy called the Original, who is really smart, warns everyone about an oncoming apocalypse, and everyone's like, no, you're crazy. And then this thing called the Dawn of Revival happens, and it leads to the UN banning all technology, effective immediately. So basically, Y2K's whole conspiracy theory just actually happens in this universe. And then the Original and some followers of his called the Apostles decide to teach humanity magic. And then at some point, the Original gains access to an alternate dimension called the Backyard. And while he was there, he created an information being, essentially an AI, called the Universal Will, which he gave the task of helping humanity. But the Universal Will, doing what most AIs in fiction tend to do, decided that what currently calls itself humanity isn't actually humanity. And then it decided that whatever it's going to replace current humanity with is actually humanity. That's a really rough explanation, but yeah, that makes sense, I think. From 2008 to 2009, a group called the Sanctus Populi is established, which is basically a giant cult around the Original. Also, Magitech is created, which allows like normal people to use magic without having to study it for a super long time. And then India withdraws from the UN after growing dissatisfied with not being able to use technology, which leads us nicely into the age of magic. All right, so an Indian multi-billionaire creates a giant airship uh, for India, since they withdrew and are allowed to use technology again. And it takes off and immediately declares itself as a sovereign state and is called the Airborne Nation of Zep. The Gear Project. In 2014, the Gear Project starts with a lead team consisting of Oscar Arkreutz, the previously mentioned That Man, the previously mentioned Frederick Balsaria, and Arya Hale, who was also previously mentioned. Frederick and Arya are like a thing. They're in a relationship. Oscar is just friends with the other two. Arya has some sort of incurable disease called TP. And then Oscar, at some point, converts Frederick into the first prototype gear and imbues him with a magical item called the Flame of Corruption. And a lab accident occurs, leading to Oscar and Arya going missing, which just ends the project, leaving Frederick just kind of sad and alone. Alright, in 2042, the US government restarts the Gear project with the intention of using gears for the military, with Oscar and Arya's help. Frederick begins a solo war with the project, and authorities identify him as bad guy. He then decides to take the first name Soul for some reason, but we'll get to that later. Also, Oscar and Arya develop the first complete command gear called Justice, which is essentially also converted Arya into this because she was dying, and she's imbued with this thing called the Scales of Juno, which is like a counterpart to the Flame of Corruption that we mentioned earlier. And the idea is that Justice will be able to control all the other gears, which will end the military use of gears, with the exception of Soul. And also Soul makes a big weapon to combat gears, but it's super unstable, so he splits it off into a bunch of different parts called the Eight Sacred Treasures. It's not that important, but it's kind of important. We'll get to it later. This leads us to the Crusades. The Black Sunrise. So Justice's first test goes wrong, and the Universal Will is there when Justice is being powered up, and it's just like, yo, you should destroy humanity for me. That would be super awesome. Justice is like, bet, I'll do that. And this causes an event called the Black Sunrise, which is where Japan gets blown up. Just gone. There's a stage of it in one of the games, and it's just a big crater. And this event, the Black Sunrise, starts what is known as the Crusades. So after the Black Sunrise, the UN has to respond to this, so they create an army to combat Justice's army of gears, called the Sacred Order of Holy Knights, because remember, technology is kind of banned, so they're all using like swords and crap as opposed to guns and tanks and whatnot. And Soul Bad Guy, who's still kind of wandering around the earth at this point because he's pretty much immortal now, saves a 6-year-old kid named Cliff Underson, and then that kid, Cliff, who's pictured here, would go on to become the leader of the Holy Order. Alright, so a character called Testament is born, and they get adopted by Cliff, and then they get taken hostage and converted into a gear against their will. A character named Chip Zanoff is born, Zato 1 is taken in by the Assassin's Guild, and Kai Kisuke joins the Holy Order. The Assassin's Guild kind of falls off and loses sight of their whole mission to like be. They were originally kind of a force for good. Their name doesn't really convey that very well, but that's what they actually were. Was they would assassinate dangerous people who were like in power. But Slayer just kind of leaves because he met an immortal woman and is like, yo, it would be really cool if I was in love with her and we got married. And then they fell in love and got married. So he's like, nah, I'm gonna go be with my wife now. And then he just kind of leaves. And then Cliff at some point convinces Soul to join the Holy Order. Zato 1 casts a forbidden spell that causes him to lose his eyesight. In exchange, he gets this little demon shadow puppet thing named Eddie. There's that gif up there somewhere. Also, Amelia, Rage, and Venom are taken in by the Assassin's Guild, and Kai succeeds Cliff as leader of the Holy Order. Chip Zanoff is saved by Tsuyoshi and becomes his apprentice. May is taken in by Johnny on March 16th, 2175. Delilah is born. We'll get back to that. And Amelia activates a forbidden spell. Again, we'll get more into these characters. I'm kind of just throwing a lot of characters out right now, but it's all good. It's all good. We'll get into the specifics. Let's see. Oh yeah. By the way, the Crusades take place over like 100 years. In case that wasn't super clear by some of these dates, it's a 100-year-long war. So that's why Cliff was like 6-ish towards the beginning, and now he's like ancient. Anyway. The Holy Order, like, seals away Justice in some sort of dimensional prison, which ends the war, and then they kind of just disband. So Kai and a bunch of the other Holy Order Knights go and just join Interpol, like, actual Interpol. It's kind of funny, honestly. Alright, now this finally brings us to the very first Guilty Gear game. So, Soul Bad Guy. We've already talked a lot about him. I'm going to introduce all the characters, by the way, before I talk about anything else, like plot. So by the way, the first Guilty Gear game is a giant tournament, like most fighting game stories are. This is the only one that's like this, by the way. Soul's fighting in this tournament to hopefully get Arya back somehow. By the way this tournament works is that you get a wish if you win. More on that later. And also Soul's theme and strive, my interpretation of it is essentially, we want the same thing, but we have different ways of doing them. Yeah. Kai Kisuke, he wants the Holy Order to be reinstated so he can have purpose because he's sad and depressed. His song, Strive song, Roar the Spark. He went through some difficult stuff, but despite that, I will still continue to lead and inspire others. May was an orphaned Japanese girl who was adopted by Johnny. She wants Johnny to get out of prison because he was kind of doing some Robin Hood type stuff, so he was thrown in prison for that. And her song Disaster of Passion essentially just boils down to she is really in love with Johnny, aka her adopted dad, and that's not going to change. Why is she like this? I don't know. It's been like this since the first game, and it's really weird. Axel Lowe, we already kind of talked about him. He stopped that gang war in 90s London, and then he got transported like 200 years in the future. He just wants to go home. That's all he wants. His Strive theme is called Out of the Box, and it essentially boils down to I can make my own choices in life. Alright, Chip Zanoff, we mentioned him earlier. He's a former drug addict who was taken in by a guy named Tsuyoshi who taught him how to be a ninja. But He got killed. His master got killed by the Assassin's Guild, and now Chip is really angry and wants revenge. His strive song is called "Play the Hero," and it essentially is just life isn't easy, but I will embrace those challenges and strive for freedom and purpose until I die. Um, Chip is a funny character. I don't have too much to say about him right now, but we'll get back to it. He is an American dude who just screams random Japanese words at you, and it's admittedly very funny. Potemkin. Potemkin was born in Zep with a genetic mutation that made him grow very large, and he's being forced to fight in the tournament on behalf of the nation of Zep because, go figure, shortly after claiming independence, Zep became like a military slave state, and Potemkin is in fact a slave in this game. His tribe theme is called Armored Clad Faith. It essentially boils down to true peace may be impossible to achieve, but that doesn't mean that I'll stop striving for it. Amelia Rage was taken in by the Assassin's Guild at a young age, but then she left the guild and really wants to destroy it and also kill Zato, because her and Zato used to be a thing. More on that later. Her strive theme is called Love the Subhuman Self, and essentially just says that you should really love yourself. Don't hate yourself, that's bad. Zato 1. He's the leader of the Assassin's Guild and Amelia's former lover. Amelia betrayed the Assassin's Guild essentially, so Zato has been thrown in prison, and he kind of doesn't like being there. So he really wants to get out of there, and then his song, Let Me Carve Your Way, we will get more into what this thing actually means later, and context around it is actually important for something that happens to Zato much later in this franchise. But essentially what I have here is, I'm not who I used to be, I just want to live in the past, please someone free me from this hell. Alright, Testament. Testament was converted into a gear by Justice at some point, and Testament was the one who created the whole tournament as a big blood sacrifice to revive Justice. Their strive theme is called Like a Weed Naturally as a Matter of Course, which just boils down to I really love life. Viken. Viken's village was raided by gears who killed her parents and caused her to lose both an arm and an eye. She wants revenge on both the gears and, more importantly, that man, aka Asuka. Her strive theme is called Mirror of the World, and it essentially is just, I'm a reflection of the world that created me, but that world doesn't exist anymore, so instead I will choose to reflect this new, much kinder world. Okay, now we get into the characters that aren't in Strive, so I have a lot less to say about these guys. Dr. Baldhead, he was one of the greatest doctors alive, then a young patient of his died, so he decided to become a serial killer. This isn't a reasonable crash out at all, I don't know why he did this is stupid. He just wants to be freed from prison. Cliff just wants to stop Justice's resurrection. Justice wants to destroy humanity. The plot of the game. Testament arranges a tournament under the guise of finding the strongest fighter to help prevent Justice's resurrection so they can just beat her up once she decides to wake up, because that dimensional prison that she was in that I mentioned earlier is kind of slowly not working anymore. Unbeknownst to the UN, this tournament is actually a big blood ritual to revive Justice and make her stronger than ever. Cliff dies during this tournament due to being, like, really old. Like, he was probably gonna beat Justice at some point, but no, then he died because he was old. Also, Zato loses control of his body after Amelia beats him up, and now Eddie is in control. And then Soul kills Justice once and for all after locking in. Guilty Gear X. That brings us to our next game. New character time. Faust. Dr. Baldhead wanted to atone for all of the serial killing that he did, so he decided to become a vigilante named Dr. Faust. Or a vigilante doctor named Faust, but something like that. I don't know. His strive theme is called Alone Infection, and it essentially is just, I want to forget my past, but I can't do that if I want to be better. His theme is complicated. I don't think this is a very good interpretation of it, but I'm trying here. Johnny. Johnny is the captain of the Jellyfish Pirates, which is the group that May is a part of. And essentially he's like this pirate, samurai, cowboy thing. I don't know, it's weird. But he's also essentially Robin Hood. And his strive theme is called Just Lean, and it's essentially just, yeah, I'm awesome, and I get all the girls. Venom. Venom is the new leader of the Assassin's Guild, after Zato got possessed by Eddie and is basically dead, but not really dead. He's just kind of wandering around. The point is, that's not Zato anymore, so he's not really doing Assassin's Guild stuff at this point. Let's see. And Venom's strive theme, A Tenth of Myself. Though this is a small part of my life, it's still me. I don't really know what this theme is about. This theme is complicated, and I kind of don't fully understand it. But I had to mention it. I don't know how to interpret it, though. It's weird. Anji Mito. He's one of the few Japanese people in the series. The other two are Baiken and Mei. We've already mentioned both of them. He uses two fans, which are part of those 8 sacred treasures we mentioned earlier, called the Zensen. And his strive theme is called Rock Parade. And it's essentially just him being like, guys, I went to a party, I met this really cute girl, and we danced together, and now we're in love, and she's so cool. It's talking about Baiken. He wants to get with Baiken, but that doesn't fully... Well, it does work out, but it's complicated. Jam Crawberry. Jam is a chef whose restaurant constantly burns down, like, a lot. And she fights using this type of magic called Key Force. Fun fact, her chunk of this thing was supposed to be a lot shorter, but then she got added to Strive, so now I have slightly more to talk about. So her Strive theme is called Trying Hard is Hard, so I try hard to try hard. And it's essentially, it's hard to succeed, but I'll keep trying and improving. Something like that. I don't know, it kind of just came out like a week ago, so I don't have too much to go off of, but, you know, whatever. Dizzy. Dizzy is the daughter of Justice and Soul Bad Guy, who is protected by 2 wing gears named Necro and Undyne. She's adopted by Johnny and the Jellyfish Pirates at some point, and her song Radiant Dawn is essentially just, I really love Kai Kisuke, because yes, they do end up together. Timeline. We're now in the year 2180, by the way. Gabriel leads a coup in Zep and establishes democratic principles, becoming the first president of Zep, and slavery is immediately abolished. Also, Potemkin and Gabriel become friends, and Gabriel helps make Potemkin like a much better fighter and train him. Post-War Administration Bureau begins development on the RoboKai series, and in 2181, Testament, now free from Justice's control, meets Dizzy and swears to protect her. Now, what actually happens in this game? A bounty of 500,000 world dollars, because yes, that's the currency in this franchise, because of course it is placed on Dizzy, because, you know, being the daughter of Justice, people think she's really dangerous. Soul defeats Dizzy, but doesn't kill her, and the official record says that Jam killed Dizzy, meaning Jam gets all the money. Dizzy is taken in by Johnny and Testament, or is taken in by Johnny, and then Testament stays behind to protect the forest that she was living in. And then Zato 1 dies, because, you know, Eddie was possessing him, but he doesn't really have a body, so Zato just kind of, dies. Or his body dies. And then Venom is appointed as leader of the Assassin's Guild, and Jam opens her restaurant, and also the first issue of a magazine called Dynamic Housewives goes on sale. I don't know why that's here, but it was on the official wiki timeline, and I thought it was funny, so I put it on the slideshow. Alright, so that brings us to Guilty Gear XX, the next game in the franchise. So RoboKai is our next character, the previously aforementioned RoboKai, I should say. He's a robotic clone of Kai Kisuke. He is very racist towards humans. However, despite being racist, he also likes women, or quote-unquote sexy women. He openly appreciates. I think he primarily makes comments towards, like, Baiken and Jam. Maybe Dizzy, too. I don't remember. Player is finally getting talked about because he was finally playable in this game. He's the founder of the Assassin's Guild and the inventor of a philosophy called dandyism. He is a vampire, that's important. He left the guild to be with his wife named Sharon. We mentioned that earlier. He also is the guy who gave Soul Bad Guy the soul part of his name. I kind of forget the reasons, but he did give Soul his name. And his strive theme is called Ups and Downs, and it's essentially just life is long, nothing lasts forever, so enjoy the moment. And Slayer, being immortal, would of course know a lot about that. Now, I know what you're thinking, Britton. What the heck is dandyism? I'm glad you asked. It's simple. Dandyism is the pursuit of beauty and refinement to such an extent that one turns themselves into a work of art, which may be accomplished through personal grooming, refined language, and leisurely hobbies. And also, like, respect for your opponents no matter what. There's a few other things that I'm kind of skimming over here. But that's what dandyism is, if you were curious. Alright, that brings us to Brisket. Bridge was born as an identical twin in a small village where identical twins are considered a bad omen, so Bucket was forced to present as female in order not to be killed, and their family just lied to the village for the longest time that no, these are actually fraternal twins, and this one's a girl and this one's a guy, which is apparently okay. Um, so Budget decided to become a bounty hunter in order to prove her masculinity. But I said her masculinity. This is because at some point Bridget decided that she is in fact a girl. Um, which, yeah, Bridget's trans. And that's what her Strive theme, The Town Inside Me, is kind of about. I'm simplifying it, but most of that theme is just about how Bridget is trans. Anyway, whatever. Moving on. This brings us to Zappa, who's a man possessed by a bunch of ghosts, and the most important of these ghosts is a budget version of Sadako from the Ring franchise named Esco. It's not really that important. Zappa's not really that important, but he is a playable character, so I had to mention him. And I think he's a cool character, but he doesn't matter to anything, so yeah. You know, a time-traveling witch who enjoys tormenting others. She's very nihilistic and does not really care about all the harm she does to other people. The only person she seems to show any remorse for her actions towards is Axel. There's a reason for that. We'll get to it. And then her Strive theme is called Requiem, and it essentially is just nothing matters and nothing is real. That's kind of what that song is saying. ABBA, who is a homunculus made in a lab, and she has a weird obsession with keys, and she spent the first 10 years of her life locked up in a lab. She eventually escapes and finds a demon-possessed axe named Flummet Nigel, or something like that. I butchered that pronunciation probably. For some reason, she sees him and immediately thinks he's a key and falls in love with him and changes his name to Paracelsus. And through the sheer willpower and ABBA's perception of him, he slowly morphs from a axe to a key. And then her Strive theme is called Symphony, and this quote from it just summarizes it pretty perfectly, that being, "I'm not here to fit in this world, I just want to make a difference." That's essentially what her theme is about. I forgot that I put this in the slideshow. Anyway, timeline stuff. After a few weeks after Dizzy's defeat and all that stuff that we mentioned earlier, Ino just kind of shows up and begins causing general problems. What kind of problems? She brings back a version of Soul Bad Guy from the past that we're going to call Order Soul, and forces Order Soul to fight Current Soul. And while they're fighting, Order Soul is like weak and tired or whatever, so Ino just kind of sneaks up and kills him. And then, she thinks, oh, this will make Current Soul Bad Guy disappear because I killed him from the past, except that doesn't work, and Soul just kind of sticks around and then beats up Ino. Why does that not work? I have no idea. Why did she think this was a good plan? I don't know. This franchise is weird. Eddie, while possessing Zato's body, just dies, because Zato's body was already dead, and Eddie's like running on fumes at this point, trying to find another host, but he can't do that, so he dies. And a group called Conclave takes away his remains to be used for science. And then, due to Robo-Kai shenanigans, Jam's restaurant catches fire and gets burned down, and then Kai and Dizzy get married in secret. More stuff. Alright. So, in 2182, Chip saves the US President Erica Bartholomew from an assassination attempt. Sin Kisuke is born to Kai and Dizzy. Sin is given away to Soul at like 6 months old because Kai's a terrible dad. And then in 2183, the United Kingdoms of Illyria are officially recognized as a nation by the UN, with Kai Kisuke being the first king, Leo Whitefang being the second king, and a man named Daryl being the third king. I tried to look for his last name. I don't think Daryl canonically has a last name. Essentially, Illyria is this giant country in the middle of like the Eurasia area. Anyway, in 2184, Chip travels to a lawless part of southern Africa and just declares himself president of this new area that he calls the Eastern Chip Kingdom. Just establishes his own country. And then Chip is the president of said kingdom, and then he takes a man named Answer and makes him his right-hand man. Alright, this leads us to Guilty Gear 2 Overture. Sin Kisuke is the son of Kai and Dizzy. He physically aged faster because he's half gear. Gears age a lot faster than humans. Keep in mind, we've seen footage of Dizzy, and I've mentioned her multiple times. She's like 6 or 12-ish, despite the fact that she looks like an adult, because, yeah. So Sin, in this game, Guilty Gear 2, I think he's like 2 or 3 years old, but by the time Strive rolled around, he's like 5. Anyway, he's living with Soul because Kai is a terrible father, and then his Strive theme is called the Hourglass, and essentially just says everything will work out. Valentine, who's the main villain of this game, is an artificial being created by the Universal Will, and she was created to help the Universal Will with the whole process of exterminating humanity. And then Dr. Peregrine and Izuna, these two characters don't really matter at all, but Dr. Peregrine is a Dragon Gear and one of the smartest characters in the franchise canonically. He researches the backyard. And then Izuna is a non-human resident of the backyard. We know nothing about him, and he's not important, and he kind of sucks. I don't care about Izuna. Anyway, Raven is also in this game. He's a survivor of the Crusades. Remember how I mentioned that way at the very beginning of all this? Yeah, he's the reason that had to be mentioned, because he died during the Crusades, except he didn't die because he's immortal. He's a servant of Asuka, aka Batman, and he's at a point where he's lived so long that the only thing he can feel anymore that brings him any feeling is pain. Story. So Valentine appears in Illyria with her big army in search of the key to this thing called the Cube. So Soul travels to the backyard and defeats Valentine, and this whole thing would later be known as the Baptisma 13 event. Which brings us to the next game, Guilty Gear Xrd. So part 1 is Exiled Sign. So Leo Whitefang is the second king of Illyria and an accomplished warrior in his own right. He's very prideful and can be level-headed when necessary, which makes him a mostly good leader. And then his Strive theme is called Hellfire, and essentially just says, all my friends are dead, it's all my fault, I want to die. Yeah, so as it turns out, Leo was living with big-time survivor's guilt, because during the Crusades, all of his men died, and he heavily blames himself for it. Ramifal Valentine. She's a servant of the Universal Will and is a successor to the original Valentine. And she just declares war on the entire world. And then her Strive theme is called Necessary Discrepancy. Essentially, people in the world in general are not complicated. Everything is not, or are complicated, and everything is not black and white. Elphelt Valentine is Ramifal's sister, who doesn't really want to destroy humanity. Instead, she just wants to fall in love and find a husband and stuff like that. And her theme extra is essentially just, life has been tough, but I'm gonna smile and enjoy it anyway. Now, are you ready for the best character in this franchise, in my opinion, i.e. my main, and my favorite character in this game because I think he is cool? The one, the only.
We talk about survival of the fittest a lot, but all that really means is the skilled live and the unskilled die. Since you're clearly in that second group, maybe pick your fights a bit more carefully. You understand what I'm saying? It's never going to matter how much you want it when you're up against someone who can kill you with a sneeze.
Bedman. Who is Bedman, aka Romeo F. Newman? Bedman is a dude who fights while completely asleep, and instead of fighting directly, he uses a giant robotic bed to fight. He sleeps all the time because if he stays awake for too long, he will die because his brain will explode. Essentially, he has crazy psychic powers, and it's so much information that if he wakes up for too long, his brain will just kill him because of how much information it is. It's too much for his body to handle or something like that. At least while also being awake. Which, he is extremely powerful, but he's limited by the fact that he's always asleep. Why is Bedman? Bedman wants to create an absolute world by combining his dream world with the real world. The Universal Will promised to help with this, and gave him that giant robotic bed so it could essentially use him as a hitman in the real world. And then he wants to create this absolute world so that him and his sister, who has the same condition as him, can have normal lives. Okay, Bedman tangent over, let's talk about the actual plot of this game. So, in 2187, Soul upgrades his weapon, the Fire Seal, to the Junkyard Dog Mark II by combining it with another one of those sacred treasures we mentioned earlier. And then the Sanctus Populi, that cult around the original and all that, deploys a group called the Opus to protect against more Valentine attacks, because obviously we don't want those. And then on October 21st, 2187, Ramifal Valentine declares war on all of humanity. more plot stuff. So the Conclave revived Zato 1 using science and magic and whatnot. Except now that Zato is back, he doesn't have like any emotions whatsoever. Also, Eddie has like calmed down and doesn't want to kill people anywhere near as much as he used to. But Zato does still feel like the only times he feels any emotions are when he is near Melia. We don't know specifically what that means. And then the Conclave plans to merge Elfelt with Justice by using the power of a giant lightning bolt that strikes once every 13 years called St. Elmo's Fire. The Conclave fails in this attempt. They're unsuccessful in reviving Justice, which leads us to part 2 of this, Excerpt Revelator. Jacko Valentine. Jacko is the reincarnation of Arya. Arya's soul is supposed to be inside of Jacko's body, but she's incomplete and only half of her soul is in there. Because of her soul being incomplete, Jacko's personality swaps between that of an innocent child and a mature woman. So essentially, Jacko's actual personality and then Arya herself. And then Perfection Can't Please Me is her song from Strive, and it's essentially just, I want to do a lot of fun things with my sexy husband, soul bad guy, because, yeah, they're essentially married. And then Kum Hae-hyun is our next character. So Kum comes from a long line of key users, but her family doesn't allow women to hold positions of power, except Kum is the only person left in her family. So there's no more men to hold positions of power. So instead of, just changing the rules, I guess, she instead decides to pilot a mech around that looks like an old man. So essentially, small girl inside giant mech that looks like old man, to summarize. Why does she do this? I don't know. I think she might be stupid. Moral of the story, this might be like the true feminism or something. I don't know. Answer Chip's right-hand man, and he was a gang member in South Africa, and then Chip beat him up, and now Answer works for him. He does all the real work of running the country, while Chip is away doing essentially whatever he wants. Okay, so plot. This lady named Ariels, who is essentially the leader of the Sanctus Populi that I mentioned earlier, reveals herself to actually be a vessel for the Universal Will, and she tries to merge Justice with Elfelt again in order to resurrect Justice. You'll notice a pattern here. But she stopped from doing this, and Jacko ends up merging with Justice to create a complete version of Arya, making Jacko human. Alright, so then Robokai and Venom team up at some point to try and kill Bedman, because Bedman kind of had to go. Bedman, realizing that he's been betrayed by Ariels at some point, and that the Universal Will is not going to help him create his absolute world, decides to, okay, I'll just kill Ariels then. But unfortunately, due to Venom and Robokai, Bedman ends up being awake for too long, so he dies. And then Ariels is arrested, Delilah wakes up, and that man, aka Oscar R. Kreutz, publicly reveals himself and turns himself over to the US government so he can be tried for his many, many crimes. Which leads us to the most recent game, Guilty Gear Strive. So Giovanna is a US Secret Service agent who fights using a magical spirit wolf named Ray. Her Strive theme is called Trigger, and it's essentially just, I have a job to do, so get out of my way and let me do it. Nagoriyuki is a vampire samurai who has been forced to be a servant of Happy Chaos, which we'll talk about in a minute. His Strive theme is, what do you fight for? And essentially just, I'm going to keep fighting no matter what. And yes, Slayer is the one who turned him into a vampire, so he does know Slayer. Gold Lewis Dickinson is the U.S. Secretary of Absolute Defense. He fights using a giant coffin containing a UMA, which he will deny is an alien, even though it's probably an alien. He is considered, and I quote the wiki here, a mainstay of the nation. I'm not 100% sure what that means. I think it's referencing the fact that he served in this position under, 2 different presidents. Anyway, his theme is called Kiss of Death, and it's essentially just, down with the system. Wait a minute, I am the system. And finally, Happy Chaos, or the original, is an omnipotent being from the backyard, who is only interested in causing conflict in order to amuse himself. So yeah, the original essentially got reincarnated after going in the backyard for too long. He went insane, and the Universal Will essentially captured him and turned him into this. And then his theme is called Drift, and I'm just going to use this quote to summarize it. When the violent storm is over, the blue sky is more beautiful than ever. You see, I want that, that's all I want. This theme is kind of complicated in general. Go listen to it, it's very good, I don't know. Oscar R. Kreutz is actually playable for once, so we'll talk about him. So Oscar, aka That Man, is the one who literally started all of this. He wants to finally atone for his crimes and surrenders himself over to the US government, and he fights using a magic book called the Tome of Origin because he's a nerd. And then his theme is called Gravity, and it's just, I've made a few mistakes. Could you forgive me, Soul? Because, yes, I think in the song he's primarily asking for Soul's forgiveness. Go listen to the song if you don't understand that interpretation. I could explain it more, but I'm not going to. Yunica. Yunica is Kai and Dizzy's daughter and Sin's older sister from a dark alternate future timeline. She uses her bike as a weapon, and inside the bike is the Thunder Seal, aka Kai's sword that he uses. But it's that version of the Thunder Seal from her future. And then Carpe Diem, her theme is essentially just, with my family's help, I can create my own future. Yeah. Did you think we were done? Get ready for part 2. Bedman again, but with a question mark now. So when the original Bedman died, he used the last of his power to create a version of his absolute world. And in this version, his sister, Delilah Newman, was actually allowed to wake up and live a mostly normal life without, again, her head exploding. And additionally, Romeo gave the Bed one final task, that being to protect Delilah and make sure that she's all happy and safe, and then after that, go destroy itself. More Bedman stuff. So Delilah blames Happy Chaos for her brother's death for some reason, even though it was really Ariel's fault, and also the fault of Venom and Robo-Kite. It seems like there's a lot of other people to blame, but sure, Happy Chaos works. Her psychic powers are stronger than her brother's by a significant margin. I'm going off of an actual quote from the game on this one, so sure, I'll use that as canon. The bed tries to destroy itself, but Delilah begs it to stay around since she can sense a part of her brother in it. And also Delilah is effectively adopted by Viken and Angie, and she now lives with them. So Bedman's Strive theme is called The Circle, and it's from the POV of the recently deceased Bedman. He doesn't know what's happening to him, why he's there. He only knows that he wants to actually be there and protect his sister. He thinks he's going to go to some sort of afterlife, but nope, there's kind of an eternal nothingness waiting for him because he did a lot of bad stuff when he was alive, probably. Because I didn't really talk about this too much. He killed a lot of people. Anyway, and I'm going to use this quote. I may not be able to make you smile, but I'll never make you cry, even once, never. These lyrics personally support my theory that he is Bedman. The man's soul is actually inside the bed, at least a little bit. I don't know, they've been really ambiguous about whether or not that's actually the case, but that's just my interpretation of it. Alright, no more Bedman for real this time. Time for the actual plot of the game. Okay, so 3 weeks have passed since the stuff that we previously mentioned in the other game. Breaks into Ariel's prison cell and just takes Happy Chaos out of her. He was just sitting inside of her. That's not a joke. I'm gonna probably show footage of it. Anyway, wants to become complete because she's fractured or whatever, and the that we've had this whole time is only part of it's weird and complicated. Anyway, essentially, if she gets complete, that would effectively make her some sort of god, and Happy Chaos wants to help her with this because he thinks it would be really, really funny. So he's like, yeah, sure, I'll help. And then Asuka turns himself over to the government in order to get their help protecting the Tome of Origin, and also kill Soul Bad Guy. More plot stuff. So Ino and Happy Chaos use Nagoriyuki kind of as their trump card, since he's the only one who can actually fight Soul and not immediately get destroyed. And then on December 13th, Happy Chaos derails this thing called the G4 Summit, which is the name of a bunch of world leaders, in order to steal the Tome of Origin, taking a bunch of world leaders hostage in the process of all this. Essentially, he reenacts the plot of White House Down for a little bit. Also, the White House itself ends up being a giant airship, because of course it is. Asuka then removes the Flame of Corruption from Soul, effectively making him a normal dude. And then Happy Chaos takes the Tome of Origin out of Asuka. Again, I'll show footage, but he literally just rips it out of his chest, and turns into a god. And then Ino is eventually defeated by Soul, Kai, Jacko, and friends. And then as Ino's about to die, she switches places, goes back in time and switches places with Axel's girlfriend Megami, so he can finally be happy. Which I guess I should explain that aspect of Axel finally. So basically, Axel's able to travel back in time, but if he does that, the entire Guilty Gear universe gets erased, because he has time travel powers. But he can switch places with someone else, i.e. he can switch places with his girlfriend Megami, but that doesn't work because then he still doesn't get to see her, and now she's trapped in the future. So, Ino helped him out with that. This is because Megami, fun fact, looks almost exactly like Ino, and Ino, in her own weird alternate life or whatever, before she did all of this stuff, had a boyfriend named Will who looked exactly like Axel. So they're like weird alternate parallels of each other. I don't know, it's complicated. Anyways, Soul and Jacko go and live normal lives because they're effectively both normal people now. Asuka decides to start a podcast for some reason, and Kai steps down as King of Valyria and welcomes the first non-human world leader. Probably Dizzy. I think it's Dizzy. I don't remember if it's confirmed anywhere, but I'm like 99% sure that he stepped down and Dizzy took his place. Anyway, while Happy Chaos was doing all of this White House stuff, Delilah and Viken try to go kill Happy Chaos for various reasons, but this doesn't work out, and Delilah tries to teleport to Happy Chaos, but since she can't control her power, she almost blows up a major city and almost kills like a few million people. Oops. Viken and friends essentially tell her to stop, and both Viken and Delilah give up their revenge and decide to go live peaceful lives. Also, Dual Rulers happens at some point, and Lucy from Cyberpunk Edge Runner shows up, but I'm not talking about all that because it's really not that important, and also I can't watch Dual Rulers because I don't have Crunchyroll. Here's a power scaling tier list. Faust has weird, like, 2 and 4 stuff, so I have no idea how to rank him. Realistically, he's probably in, like, Superhuman, but also his magic is canonically really strong, so I have zero idea how to rank him. The godlike tier feels mostly justified. That guy between Slayer and Raven is Gabriel. Slayer considers him a rival, so I'm gonna say that's good enough to actually put him decently high up. Also, I didn't talk about Leopoldo and this guy at the end of the godlike tier, but somewhere in the wiki, he's mentioned as being a, quote, Megadeth class gear. There's no sources for that. Good enough for me. So I guess that means he's strong, but he's from a spin-off game, so he's not really important at all. Let's see, is there anyone else here actually worth talking about? Oh, yeah, I should probably talk about some of these people at the bottom that don't matter at all. In the S tier, we have Bridget's teddy bear, Roger. I think he's maybe possessed by some sort of, like, ghost or demon or something. I don't think he's all that powerful, so, yeah. Paracelsus is just a key. Sure, he can, like, encourage bloodlust in people who pick him up, but that doesn't really do much. Sharon is Slayer's wife. That's just a normal human woman who happens to be immortal. I don't think she's winning any fights. The guy on the end there is Vernon, who's the US president for most of Guilty Gear's story. He's just kind of a normal politician, except he has a bionic arm that's also a gun. Yippee, I guess. I'm not going to touch on some of these guys at the bottom here, but the one at the very end of the sucks tier is Daryl. That's the third King of Valyria guy that I mentioned. He's not important, and I don't think he's winning any combat feats. He has, like, no feats. He's not important. He sucks. Anyway, wow, that is all over. I'm glad that took forever, but I'm glad it's done. There's a giant QR code here. If you want to take a crappy Guilty Gear quiz, I have that. I'll also probably put the link in the description if you would rather. I'll just do it that way because I don't know if this QR code works anymore or not. Anyway, thank you for listening to my TED Talk. I hope you enjoyed it. If I ever do this again, hopefully it will be with a much shorter and less complicated franchise. Yeah, no, I'm done. I don't want to do Blaze Blue. Goodbye. Like, subscribe, whatever.
Please don't wait for me down.